Imagine a man so hated, so feared that his enemies had to poison him, shoot him multiple times, beat him senseless, and then drown him in a frozen river just to make sure he was dead. And even then, whispers persisted that he was still struggling for life beneath the ice. This wasn't a monster from a horror film. This was a real man, a Siberian peasant who clawed his way into the heart of the most powerful empire on Earth, mesmerized its rulers, and became the most infamous figure in all of Russia. This is the story of the mad monk who wasn't a monk, the holy man who was a notorious sinner, the healer whose presence heralded the death of a dynasty. This is the story of Grigori Rasputin. Our tale begins not in the gilded palaces of St. Petersburg, but in the remote, muddy village of Pokrovskoye, Siberia. It was a world away from royalty, a place of harsh winters and simple faith. Here, in 1869, Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin was born into a peasant family. His early life was unremarkable. He was a farmer, a husband, a father. He was likely illiterate, known for his rowdiness, his drinking, and his womanizing. There was little to suggest he would ever leave his village, let alone shake an empire to its core. But then something changed. Around the age of 28, Rasputin had a profound spiritual awakening. He claimed to have seen a vision of the Virgin Mary. This experience transformed him. He left his family for a pilgrimage, wandering the vast Russian landscape, visiting monasteries and absorbing the deep mystical traditions of the Orthodox faith. He never took formal vows. He never became an official monk. Instead, he became a starets, a wandering holy man, a spiritual elder who offered guidance and prayers to those in need. And he had a gift. People who met him were struck by his presence. He was tall and imposing, with long, unkempt hair and a tangled beard. But it was his eyes that truly captivated people. They were described as pale blue, almost translucent, blazing with an unnerving intensity. People said that when Rasputin looked at you, it felt as though he could see directly into your soul. His reputation began to grow. Stories of his wisdom and, more importantly, his ability to heal the sick spread through the villages. He was a man of the people, speaking their language, understanding their faith. And in an empire simmering with discontent, a true man of the people was a powerful and dangerous novelty. In 1903, this magnetic peasant mystic arrived in the imperial capital, St. Petersburg. The city was the glittering heart of the Russian Empire, a place of immense wealth, rigid social hierarchies, and deep spiritual curiosity. The aristocracy, often bored and decadent, were fascinated by mysticism and the occult. They were drawn to Rasputin's raw, earthy spirituality. He was an exotic creature from the untamed East, a genuine article in a world of pretenders. Through a network of well-connected church officials and aristocratic ladies, the Siberian peasant with the hypnotic eyes soon found himself in the most exclusive drawing rooms of the city. He was coarse. His manners were appalling, but his charisma was undeniable. He spoke of God in simple, powerful terms that resonated with the spiritually starved elite. And soon, his reputation reached the one place that mattered most, the Alexander Palace, home of the Tsar and Tsarina of all the Russias. To understand why Rasputin was able to gain such an incredible hold over the royal family, you must first understand their profound desperation. Tsar Nicholas II was an autocrat, ruler of 1/6 of the world's landmass. But in private, he was a gentle, indecisive man, ill-suited to the brutal demands of his position. His wife, the German-born Tsarina Alexandra Fedorovna, was deeply religious, intensely private, and widely disliked by the Russian people for her foreign heritage and shy demeanor. Their love was genuine, but they were isolated, trapped in the gilded cage of their own power, and they harbored a terrible, state-shattering secret. They had 4 beautiful daughters, but the future of the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty rested on the fragile shoulders of their only son, Alexei. The Tsarevich was a bright, lively boy, but he was afflicted with hemophilia, the royal disease passed down to Alexandra from her grandmother, Queen Victoria of England. Hemophilia meant that Alexei's blood didn't clot properly. The smallest bump, bruise, or cut could trigger uncontrollable internal or external bleeding, leading to agonizing pain, permanent joint damage, and the constant threat of death. The imperial doctors were helpless. Every medical treatment they tried seemed only to make things worse. Nicholas and Alexandra lived in a state of perpetual terror, watching their beloved son suffer, knowing that the future of their empire was bleeding away with him. It was into this atmosphere of fear and despair that Rasputin was summoned in 1905. The young Tsarevich was suffering from a severe bleeding episode. He was in excruciating pain, his body swollen and discolored. The doctors had given up hope. They told the distraught parents to prepare for the worst. Then the rugged peasant from Siberia was shown into the child's room. What happened next would become the foundation of his legend. Rasputin approached the boy's bed. He didn't use medicine. He simply stood over Alexei, spoke in a calm, soothing voice, and prayed. He told the frantic Alexandra that her son would live, that the doctors should be dismissed, and that she must have faith. He laid a hand on the boy, and then the inexplicable happened. The bleeding stopped, the pain subsided, the fever broke. The next morning, Alexei was sitting up in bed on the road to a miraculous recovery. To the desperate Tsarina, this was nothing short of divine intervention. Grigori Rasputin was not just a holy man. He was a messenger from God, sent specifically to save her son and the heir to the Russian throne. How did he do it? The question has been debated for over a century. Skeptics suggest he used hypnosis, his calming presence lowering the boy's blood pressure and slowing the bleeding. Others argue that his most effective treatment was simply ordering the doctors to stand down. Unbeknownst to them at the time, a common treatment for pain was aspirin, which is a blood thinner, the worst possible thing to give a hemophiliac. By removing the doctors and their cures, Rasputin may have simply allowed the boy's body to heal itself. But Alexandra didn't care about scientific explanations. All she knew was that when the doctors failed, Rasputin succeeded. Time and time again, whenever Alexei had a crisis, Rasputin would be summoned, and time again, the boy would recover. He became their indispensable secret weapon, their holy talisman. Alexandra began to refer to him simply as our friend. His access to the imperial family was unprecedented and absolute. He could walk into the palace at any hour, even into the private chambers of the Empress and her daughters, something no other man outside the immediate family was permitted to do. This unkempt, ill-mannered peasant had become the most trusted confidant of the Empress of Russia, and with that trust came an intoxicating and ultimately fatal degree of influence. While Rasputin's role in the palace began as a spiritual healer, it did not end there. The Tsarina's faith in him was total. If he could save her son through the power of prayer, then surely his prayers and his advice could save Russia itself. She began to consult him on matters of state. Who should be appointed minister? What should be done about a food shortage? Which general should lead the army? Rasputin, the barely literate peasant, was now whispering advice into the ear of the autocrat, shaping the political destiny of a vast empire. He reveled in his newfound power, boasting that he had the Tsarina wrapped around his little finger. This consolidation of power coincided with an explosion of scandalous behavior outside the palace walls. The holy man who prayed with the Empress by day would spend his nights in a whirlwind of debauchery. He was a prodigious drinker and held raucous parties in his apartment, attended by a strange mix of high society admirers and prostitutes. He preached a bizarre doctrine of redemption through sin, arguing that to truly repent and be close to God, one must first have something to repent for. It was a convenient theology for a man of his appetites. Rumors flew through St. Petersburg, each more lurid than the last. It was said he held orgies, that he was the secret lover of the Tsarina, that he had sexually corrupted her 4 young daughters. Whispers claimed he had the entire royal family under some form of hypnotic or sexual control. While most of these extreme tales were likely fabrications, Rasputin did little to discourage them. He would often boast of his influence, drunkenly showing off letters from the Empress to prove his importance. The Russian public and the aristocracy were aghast. To them, Rasputin was a demonic figure, a greasy, lecherous charlatan who had bewitched their rulers. He became the living symbol of the corruption and decay at the heart of the Romanov regime. Vicious political cartoons depicted him as a giant puppet master, with the tiny figures of Nicholas and Alexandra dangling from his strings. He was the dark force behind the throne, the true ruler of Russia. The situation reached a boiling point with the outbreak of World War I in 1914. The war was a catastrophe for Russia. The army was poorly equipped, the leadership was incompetent, and the country suffered staggering losses. In a disastrous move, Tsar Nicholas II decided to leave the capital to assume personal command of the army at the front. This left Tsarina Alexandra, a woman of German birth, in charge of the government back home. And who was her chief advisor? Grigori Rasputin. The result was chaos. Ministers were hired and fired with bewildering speed, based on Rasputin's whims and visions. Competent officials were replaced by his corrupt and incompetent cronies. The government ground to a halt. The war effort faltered. Food shortages led to riots in the cities. The entire country was careening towards disaster, and at the center of it all in the public's mind was the malevolent figure of the Mad Monk. He was blamed for every military defeat, every political failure, every bread line. To save Russia, the politicians and aristocrats concluded Rasputin had to be eliminated. By the winter of 1916, the Russian Empire was on the brink of collapse. The war was a bloody stalemate, the people were starving, and revolutionary fervor was bubbling just beneath the surface. For a powerful group of conservative aristocrats, the source of all this chaos was singular and clear: Grigori Rasputin. They believed that if they could just remove this cancerous peasant from the body politic, the Tsar would see reason, the government would stabilize, and the monarchy could be saved. A conspiracy was born, led by a trio of unlikely assassins. The ringleader was the fabulously wealthy Prince Felix Yusupov, a flamboyant young aristocrat married to the Tsar's niece. He was joined by the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the Tsar's own cousin, and Vladimir Purishkevich, a right-wing and fiercely monarchist politician. Their plan was to lure Rasputin to Yusupov's magnificent Moika palace on the pretext of a late-night party where he would meet the prince's famously beautiful wife, Irina. Rasputin, ever susceptible to the charms of a beautiful woman, readily accepted the invitation. On the frigid night of December 29, 1916, Rasputin arrived at the palace. He was led down to a lavishly decorated cellar dining room. Yusupov, playing the charming host, offered his guest plates of petits fours and glasses of sweet Madeira wine. What Rasputin didn't know was that both the cakes and the wine had been laced with enough potassium cyanide to kill a dozen men. The conspirators waited upstairs, listening for the sound of their victim collapsing. But nothing happened. Rasputin devoured the poisoned cakes and drank the wine with relish, chatting amiably with his host. According to Yusupov's dramatic and likely embellished account, an hour passed, then another. Rasputin showed no ill effects whatsoever. He was simply enjoying the party. Panic began to set in among the assassins. Their foolproof plan had failed. Yusupov, losing his nerve, excused himself and went upstairs to confer with his co-conspirators. They decided on a more direct approach. Yusupov returned to the cellar, this time holding a revolver behind his back. He calmly walked up to Rasputin, asked him to look at a crucifix, and shot him in the chest. Rasputin roared and collapsed onto the bearskin rug, seemingly dead. The conspirators were relieved. They began to make plans to dispose of the body. Yusupov, however, felt a sudden, morbid urge to look at the corpse one last time. As he bent over the body, the unbelievable happened. Rasputin's left eye fluttered open, then the right. With a horrifying, guttural cry, he leaped to his feet, foaming at the mouth. He lunged at Yusupov, clawing at his shoulder and tearing off an epaulette. He was like a cornered beast, filled with an unholy strength. Rasputin then staggered out of the room and up the stairs, crashing into a locked exterior door. He found another way out and burst into the snowy palace courtyard, screaming that he would tell the Tsarina everything. Purishkevich, the politician, ran after him, firing his own pistol. The first shot missed. The second missed. Finally, the third shot struck Rasputin in the back and a fourth hit him in the head. He fell face first into a snowdrift, motionless. But the conspirators were taking no more chances. They dragged the body back inside, and in a final act of brutality, Yusupov grabbed a heavy iron dumbbell and began bludgeoning Rasputin's head with it. Even then, they were terrified he might rise again. They tightly bound his body with ropes, wrapped him in a heavy curtain, and drove him to the Petrovsky Bridge. There, in the dead of night, they heaved his mutilated corpse through a hole in the ice into the freezing waters of the Neva River. They were certain that no man could survive such an ordeal. Grigori Rasputin was finally dead. The conspirators believed they were heroes. They had rid Russia of its greatest evil and saved the monarchy from itself. But they were wrong. Rasputin's death did not solve Russia's problems. It only accelerated its demise. When the Tsarina learned of the murder of our friend, she was inconsolable. The Tsar, returning from the front, was shaken. The murder, carried out by members of his own family, revealed the depth of the rot and division within the ruling class. The assassination didn't restore faith in the monarchy. It shattered what little was left. It proved to the common people that the entire system was corrupt, a world of decadent nobles murdering a peasant in a palace basement. More eerily, Rasputin's death seemed to fulfill one of his own chilling prophecies. He had once written a letter to the Tsar, stating,